a short stroll from the main conference centre in Birmingham, like-minded Conservatives could meet for a coffee and muffins at a whole mini-conference called the Freedom Zone. With the party in coalition with the left-of-centre Liberal Democrats, this was a place where many Conservatives confessed they felt they could really address the issues they cared about, such as low taxes, rolling back the state and individual freedoms. Two speakers at this fringe included Deane of the pressure group Big Brother Watch, which campaigns against intrusion into people's privacy, and Claire Fox from the Institute of Ideas. I wanted to know why they thought freedom was such a political issue in what is surely one of the most free countries in the world. Claire Fox first.
I definitely do not think that we live in a free society. I wish we did. I'm afraid I can see freedoms being chipped away every day. And whilst I'm delighted that the coalition has, at least rhetorically, said it's going to burn a lot of the laws that were brought in that made us less free, I think the culture of illiberalism is well and truly alive. And things like, for example, the new Equalities Bill is just one example of a new piece of legislation which should have been burnt and dumped, which is actually going to make us less free.
Just explain, what's in that you don't like?
In the name of equality, we've been giving a bill which effectively polices, for example, our interpersonal relationships at work. There's a clause in there about third-party harassment where if you hear somebody say something offensive, you can complain and sue your employer. Of course, I support rights for people who are discriminated against, but this bill actually discriminates against every individual as a private person to make decisions about how they live their lives, and it's frighteningly sinister.
Deane, there are a whole list of things why the Equalities Bill isn't helpful. Are there other ways where freedom has been whittled away as you see it in Britain?
Yes, there are many. I am deeply disappointed, and I say this as an instinctive supporter of the Conservative Party and the coalition, that a lot of the rhetoric and hot air that we've heard about advancing freedom, which will have played a part in their getting elected, has not manifested itself as yet in action.
I wonder, Claire, whether we're a bit at fault as a public, because something happens, there is a problem, whether it's crime, for example, and people shout something's got to be done and governments feel that they have to jump, and that's why it happens.
Well, sometimes people do shout something has to be done, and sometimes it's the role of people who have a leadership in society to say, no, nothing has to be done and don't panic. But I think there's also some very insidious ways that these limits on our freedom are brought in. For example, public health, an area that people don't often think as a Trojan or horse for making us less free. But in fact, one of the first things that David Cameron proclaimed was that we had to really address the issue of public health, and the problem was that people were making the wrong lifestyle choices and that they were choosing to do unhealthy things like eat the wrong food, drink too much and so on. And in the guise of what looked like a very paternalistic, caring moment, he allowed the healthocracy, who might have abolished quangos and the quangocracy, but we have a healthocracy that wants to tell us and micromanage every aspect of our personal decision making about what we eat and how we live our lives.
Surely there is a role for government in public education, for example on health, because the taxpayer is the person who's got to pay for all that sickness of people who have liver disease from drinking too much.
Well, I'm very nervous about the kind of mean-spirited approach which suggests that if you are responsible for your own ill health, that why should anyone else pay? On that basis, I would be saying, I've never been skiing in my life, why should I pay for that person who's just broken their leg skiing? And I think these are moralistic campaigns that don't even have the courage to say, I'm moralistic about it. I don't mind if you're moralistic, I just want you to admit it. But to hide behind a kind of health scare and to then drag out science is an abuse of science and an abuse of evidence.
Alex?
I agree with that, and it was C.S. Lewis who reminded us that of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive, because you can fight off those who plainly wish you ill, but when you're confronted with people who come with cotton wool and say it's all for your own good, then it's much more difficult to resist.
I don't want to be treated as a child, and when you talk about a government that knows what's good for you, it infantilises it all. It tells us that we can't be grown up enough to make our own mistakes and learn from them. They know best.
Well, I wanted to ask you both, do you think that the government has made us all a bit wimpy, a bit reliant on it? Alex?
We in this country treat children like adults. We ask them to make decisions they're not really able to make because we say, oh, you discover these things for yourself, and we don't believe in teaching actual things anymore, whether it be times tables or values. So we treat children like adults, and we treat adults like children. That's not just this government, that's been the trend in this country, certainly for the last 2 or 3 generations.
I don't want to just make this a government bashing session. They deserve to be bashed, but that's not really the point. But one of the reasons why I think so many of our freedoms are so easily thrown away by politicians is that we actually haven't had a thoroughgoing discussion about what freedom is in this society. It's something that people speak of principle and speak to supporting, but actually you suddenly find that there's very little consistency in, for example, defending free speech. I defend free speech except when it comes to hate speech. I defend free speech except when it comes to this, and so on and so forth. So what I would suggest is that this is an intellectual battle of ideas that needs to be fought and won by those of us who believe in it. I'm not going to trust politicians to do that. It's up to us to do it for ourselves.
Claire Fox and Alex Deane.